Welcome back. Now, another perspective on Russian involvement in our election. Back in September, when the White House had sensitive intelligence about Russia and the election to share with Congress, they convened what is called the so-called Gang of 12 in intelligence. These are House and Senate leaders and key committee chairmen. One of those attending this meeting was Congressman Schiff of California. Schiff heard firsthand the evidence that Russia was trying to tip the scales in Donald Trump's favor. Schiff is the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, and he joins me now. Congressman Schiff, welcome to Meet the Press.
Thanks, Chuck.
I know you were listening to my interview with Reince Priebus, the incoming chief of staff, and he was denying, was looking for sourced information that would somehow prove this allegation, was not ready to accept the conclusions of these intelligence reports that say Russia was at least trying to do something with this election. Obviously, the CIA went even further. What can you share with us to prove something to Reince Priebus to essentially say you're wrong on this?
Well, first of all, I thought that interview was breathtaking. There's really no doubt that the Russians hacked our institutions. So you don't have the Director of National Intelligence making a public statement the way he did in October without there being a broad consensus of all the intelligence agencies. And frankly, I don't know a Democrat or Republican who has heard the intelligence that would quarrel with those conclusions. So I think that's fact one. The Russians definitely, this was not China, this wasn't some 400-pound guy in New Jersey or anyone else, this was the Russians. Second, in terms of what the Russians were after, plain they were after sowing discord, and in this they were spectacularly successful. But it wasn't alone sowing discord. They had a candidate with very pro-Putin, pro-Russian views, who belittled NATO, who was willing to potentially remove sanctions on Russia, and by contrast they had in Secretary Clinton a candidate very tough on Russia, and who they blamed, as Ambassador McFaul said, for the protests, the mass demonstrations against the corruption in the Russian elections in 2011. You would have to believe, and obviously I can't go into the class information, but you'd have to believe that the uniform nature of the hacking and the dumping of information that was damaging to Secretary Clinton and helpful to Donald Trump was both coincidental and accidental, and the Russians didn't know what they're doing to believe that they had no interest in helping one candidate. That's simply not credible.
Well, I understand that, but let me play devil's advocate here, and this has happened before with intelligence assessments, which is political figures. Essentially, it's a form of confirmation bias, right? They only see the intelligence that supports a point of view that they have going into it. Is there any chance here this is confirmation bias on the intelligence community in general, or on those folks that are interpreting the intelligence?
No, I don't think so. I think the circumstantial evidence, which is all I could talk about publicly, is so profound that you really have to believe that to accept Reince Priebus's argument that the Russians aren't capable of hacking Republican institutions. Well, the Russians have demonstrated they can hack practically any government institution, any private institution, and that's simply not a credible argument. And the fact that we have a president-elect who is willing to disregard the overwhelming evidence of the intelligence community just on the basis of the Russian involvement in the hacking of our institutions tells me that this will be a president who will disregard even the best assessments of the intelligence community when it doesn't suit his own version of events. That is extraordinarily damaging. And I'll say one other thing, Chuck. The reason that this Russian active measures campaign has been so phenomenally successful is that you have the rare specter of a presidential candidate and now president-elect willing to give the Russians cover. This is effective because the Russians can put out on their TV, their Russia Today and their Sputnik, that the president-elect of the United States doesn't believe that they were involved. And that is so extraordinarily beneficial to Russian propaganda. It's what has made this so powerful and so damaging to us.
Let me ask you this. In the Washington Post story, apparently the president wanted to go public with this information and wanted to have sort of a bipartisan statement about it. And apparently 2 Republicans, and one of them named as Mitch McConnell, objected to it. What can you say about that allegation in the Washington Post?
Well, I can say this. We certainly have had Gang of 8 and other briefings on this issue, and we've had plenty of discussions both before the election and we've had briefings since the election about the Russian meddling. And there wasn't a bipartisan agreement either before, and I think we are seeing some bipartisan interest in investigating thereafter. But I can say this, there was really nothing preventing the administration on its own from being even more declaratory in terms of what the intelligence showed. And I have been urging the administration to be more forthcoming with the public. I think they still should. And I think we should work with our European allies to sanction the Russians for this behavior.
Do you think that decision to not come out as definitively before the election was a mistake by President Obama?
I do think it was a mistake. I think it was a mistake even earlier, frankly, not to react more forcefully when North Korea hacked us, because I think those kind of, that lack of deterrence invited the Russians to meddle and consider they could do this with impunity. And I hope we will have a bipartisan, non-partisan joint investigation of the intelligence communities, or a commission like my colleagues Swalwell and Cummings are proposing. This ought to be a non-partisan issue. This is not about relitigating the election. It's about getting good information to the American people about what happened and preventing it and deterring the Russians in the future.
Adam Schiff, I have to leave it there for time. I appreciate you coming on, the top Democrat on the House Intelligence